There are things that are not up for debate. That LeBron is one of the most dominant players in history, no one denies. That he's an extraordinary athlete, neither. But in the world of sports, especially in one as statistical as basketball, there is a silent trap that, if you don't look closely, slips past you like a well-executed fake. And that trap might be hidden exactly where you least expect it, in the assists, those that show up on the stat sheet as naturally as a rebound or a point, but if you break them down play by play, they fall apart like wet paper. In the modern NBA, a player can make a pass, his teammate can dribble the ball 3 times, dodge 2 defenders, spin on his axis and dunk it, and still, the passer gets the assist. And if that sounds strange to you, wait until you see how that small flexibility in the rule, that statistical courtesy, became a perfect tool to inflate numbers, feed narratives, and build legacies. Now, what happens when that benefit is systematically applied to the most media-driven face of basketball today? What happens if the numbers we use to define greatness aren't as true as we think? And what if behind every triple-double there's a story that's a little less epic? What you're about to see is not a gratuitous criticism, it's a magnifying glass, a surgical review, play-by-play of how the rules of the game changed. But the names etched in history still carry the same weight. What if I told you that many of LeBron's assists aren't really assists? We're going to look at the stats that built the myth and ask ourselves if some of them were simply that, an inflated myth. The most ironic part of this whole story is that the scandal didn't start with LeBron, it started with Jordan, or rather, with those who have spent years trying to discredit him. In their eagerness to prove that the real GOAT is LeBron, many analysts, influencers, fans, and media outlets began to scrutinize the numbers from the 90s. The argument was simple. Jordan's legacy is inflated, the stats from that era are a joke. They gave out assists for breathing, steals that never happened, ghost blocks, all just vintage smoke. And that's when the dirty game began. They started questioning every number from that decade, watching old tapes, counting rebounds, timing passes, all to prove that MJ and company's numbers were pure myth, that Stockton wasn't that great a passer, that Gary Payton's steals were inflated, that Rodman wasn't as much of a defensive monster as they painted him, and that Jordan's Defensive Player of the Year award in '88 was literally Fugazi. Yes, that was the word, Fugazi. As if instead of talking basketball, we were at a Scorsese gangster table. The goal was clear: destroy the pedestal of the past to justify the present. If they could prove that the old numbers were inflated, then today's records, especially LeBron's, would shine brighter. They were legitimate, verifiable, modern, rigorous. The message was, we know how to count. But in that attempt to blow up history, they made a brutal mistake. Because by opening that Pandora's box, by asking for the stats to be examined under a microscope, they allowed exactly the same to be done to the present. And that's where it all starts to fall apart. Because if we're going to demand surgical accuracy to evaluate players from the past, we have to apply it to the present too. To everyone, even LeBron. And when you do that, when you take current games and start watching play by play, what gets recorded as an assist, what you find isn't all that different from what they criticized from the 90s. It's even worse. In that attempt to dirty the past, they expose an uncomfortable truth that modern era stats are not purer or more reliable. They're more permissive, softer, more convenient. So if they wanted to re-examine history under a microscope, fine. But the microscope doesn't have an expiration date. And now it's pointed at the present. In theory, an assist is a clear-cut play. You pass the ball, the other guy scores. Simple, basic. There shouldn't be much room for doubt, but in the modern NBA, the definition of assist has been stretched like old chewing gum. What used to be a direct pass to the basket can now be a pass to a teammate who takes 3 dribbles, spins on his axis, shakes off 2 defenders, and scores with flair. And that, incredibly, still counts as an assist. It's not an interpretation, it's not a technical detail, it's a complete transformation of what used to be a concrete action into a play that many times isn't even related to the initial pass. And the problem isn't that it changed, the problem is that it changed without anyone saying so. No official announcement, no rulebook revision. It changed because it was convenient, because it sold, because the narrative benefits more from a triple-double than from a solid game without flashy numbers. So today you've got stat sheets saying a player dished out 10 assists, but when you watch the game, you find that 4 or 5 of those were passes that didn't lead directly to anything. That needed dribbles, fakes, post-ups, and even full seconds of one-on-one play before the other guy scored. In fact, on the court, in the neighborhood, at the club, nobody gives you credit for that assist. No one says, what a pass, if the scorer had to do all the work himself. But in the NBA, they do. Why? Because in the age of the algorithm, a triple-double is gold. It makes headlines, it sells jerseys, it racks up likes, retweets, and Instagram clips. So the bar was lowered, and with the bar low, everyone can fly. But there's something even murkier. This statistical generosity doesn't apply equally to everyone. On certain courts, like the Lakers at Staples Center, the stat sheets are so friendly to their stars, it's borderline embarrassing. There are literally journalists who've taken the time to break down play by play how the numbers get manipulated from the scorer's table. And guess who's one of the biggest beneficiaries of that system? Exactly. LeBron? It's one thing to have suspicions, it's something else entirely to put them to the test. And that's exactly what Patrick Redford, a journalist at Defector, did when he decided to confront something almost everyone sensed, but no one dared to say out loud: how many assists in the NBA are real and how many are just stat sheet smoke. And let's be clear, Redford isn't some anonymous fan on Twitter. He's a sports journalist. He writes with data, not memes, and his experiment wasn't some anti-LeBron crusade or a viral stunt. It was pure journalism, observation, contrast, and sound judgment, the way a lot more things in this sport should be done. He picked a normal night, no playoffs, no superstars, nothing unusual, just 6 random games, 144 official assists, and he sat down to watch every single one by one. The result, nearly 20% were at the very least questionable, some were flat out absurd, passes that led to nothing, plays where the scorer did all the work, dribbles, cuts, changes of direction, tough shots, and yet the passer still got the credit, as if just touching the ball a few seconds earlier was enough. One example Redford pointed out was as simple as it gets: a lateral pass with no offensive intent that ended in a bucket only after the teammate pulled off some magic. And still, assist. As if the pass had been the engine behind the play, as if the creator was the guy just standing on the perimeter, and that was just one night, one random sample, from games with no media pressure, no big stars, no external incentives. And still, the margin of error was brutal, which means this isn't an anecdote, it's not a glitch in the system, it is the system. And so the question becomes inevitable. If this happens with rotation players in regular games, what happens when the passer is a superstar? What happens when there are incentives behind it? Averages to maintain, records to chase, narratives that need numbers. Because Redford's experiment wasn't a theory, and it wasn't a fan's complaint. It was evidence, cold, measurable, undeniable, and it left behind an uncomfortable, almost disrespectful, but absolutely necessary question. If this is how basic stats are measured in the modern NBA, if this happens with guys at the end of the bench, how many of LeBron's assists should we be rewatching from scratch? Anyone who's ever really played basketball at a park, at a club, or during school recess knows it without needing an explanation. There are codes, and one of them is sacred. If you make a pass that leads directly to a bucket without the other guy having to do magic, that's an assist. You earned it. People applaud. But if the receiver has to dribble 3 times, spin in the air, take contact, and still finish, nope, that one's not yours. That one's all his. In the streets, that's an unwritten rule. No one argues about it. There's no stat sheet, but there's truth, and truth isn't for sale. In the modern NBA, that truth has been watered down. Today you can finish a game with 11 official assists, having made maybe 4 real ones. The rest are favors from the scorer's table, plays that wouldn't pass the sniff test in any neighborhood court or even in a decent practice. That's the problem. The basic standard has been lost, and with it, the real value of each number. Because if everything counts as an assist, then nothing really counts anymore. And make no mistake, it's not an error, it's a choice. A system that chose to lower the bar because it's convenient, because highlights sell, because high averages inflate legacies, and because the star of the moment, yes, LeBron included, needs to back up his myth with stats that sound epic, even if they aren't always legit. Because in the street, if you take credit for what you didn't do, they pull you from the game. But in today's NBA, that gets you into the Hall of Fame. And if in the neighborhood those kinds of assists don't count, in the modern NBA they not only count, sometimes they even define legacies. No player represents that phenomenon better than LeBron James, because when you look at his numbers, they're striking. Over 10,000 regular season assists, 3rd all time, the greatest passing forward in history. But when you analyze how those numbers are built, something starts to feel off. There's a clear example, his 77th game against the Hawks, counting playoffs. Plays where the receiver dribbles twice, 3 times, spins, dodges a defender, and finishes, and still the assist is credited to LeBron. Plays like that with video and all were officially validated. They're on his personal record, and yes, they're part of his legacy. What's most striking is that these situations aren't exceptions. In fact, we've already seen how, on a random NBA night, a journalist found that a significant percentage of assists were inflated. Now, if that happens in average games, how wouldn't it happen with the most watched, most media-driven, and most protected player on the planet? And that's what makes people uncomfortable. Because while some players see their stats scrutinized down to the last decimal, others seem to operate with absolute immunity. The problem isn't just what gets counted, it's who does the counting, and who they're counting it for. So the question becomes unavoidable. Why the double standard? Why does a play that would be just ordinary for any other player turn into pure gold when it's LeBron? This isn't about denying that LeBron is a great passer, because he is. But when the narrative leans so heavily on stats, and those stats are built with such generosity, it's fair to ask, are we really witnessing a legendary career or a version edited for the history books? There's something that's never been said out loud but has always been there. The stat-keeping system in the past wasn't just stricter, it was also a lot more unfair, especially toward Jordan, because while today you can get an assist for any teammate who shoots within 3 seconds of receiving the ball, back in the 80s that didn't happen. If the receiver took more than one dribble, if he faked, if he spun, goodbye assist. And many times, even if it was a surgical pass that broke down the defense, it still wouldn't be recorded. The scorekeepers had to be rigorous, literal. So what happens if we apply today's criteria to those old games? Then the story changes, and drastically. A YouTuber, the same one who reanalyzed all of MJ's playoff games from 85 to 89, stopped at a few specific matches that are impossible to ignore. Games where the official stat sheet doesn't match what happened on the court, where the narrative that Jordan didn't pass falls apart, not because of opinions, but because of footage. Take these cases. In the legendary game against Boston in 1986, the one where Jordan dropped 63 points, the official stats gave him just 2 assists. But using today's criteria, he should have had at least 5. There are 3 clear plays where he breaks the defense, finds his teammate, and sets up a direct scoring opportunity. Against the Pistons in 1988, same story. The box score says 5 assists, but in reality it was 7. 2 extra passes that weren't counted even though they met all the modern standards: the read, the advantage created, the quick shot. Same against the Knicks in 89, 3 official, 4 real. It might seem like a small difference, but that margin repeats itself game after game, year after year. All of that adds up, and when you start doing the full math, you realize that Jordan wasn't just underestimated. He was measured with a completely different stick, a harsher one, a stricter one that's no longer used today, but that many still use to judge his legacy. They've always said the same thing, that Jordan was a scoring genius, sure, but individualistic, that he didn't make his teammates better, that he wasn't generous with the ball. And in contrast, LeBron, the king, was sold as the complete player, the guy who scores, assists, rebounds, the one who thinks pass first, the one who plays for the team. But that image, repeated like a mantra for years, starts to wobble when you look at the numbers through the same lens we use today. Because if we take MJ's playoff games from 1985 to 1989 and analyze them using today's assist criteria, the same standard applied to LeBron, the average shifts. It's no longer the official 6.6 assists per game. It rises to 7.3. Yes, Jordan, the selfish one, beats LeBron's assist average across all of his playoff games, 7.2. And there's more. During his Miami era, supposedly LeBron's peak, the moment he became the most efficient player of his career, he averaged just 5.7 assists per game. Well below that, Jordan, who supposedly didn't like to share the ball. But there's something even more telling. Jordan was a shooting guard, not a point guard, not a point forward, not the focal point of a system built around passing lanes, and yet under today's rules, he distributed the ball better than the so-called best passer of his generation. So how much of that narrative was actually true, and how much of it was just a need to sell an image of LeBron as the perfect player? Maybe the real story wasn't about who passed more, but about who needed to show it all the time. Jordan just played, and sometimes that said more than any stat sheet ever could. The NBA is a show, and like any show, it needs a narrative. But there's something that has become impossible to ignore: the double standard, the way the discourse shifts depending on who's being evaluated. And one of the best examples of that came, ironically, from ESPN. In 2018, journalist Brian Windhorst, historically linked to LeBron, practically part of his unofficial PR team, publicly expressed outrage because the Lakers were padding Lonzo Ball's stats. He said they were ruining his image with fake, inflated, made-up assists. He literally called it juiced stats, inflated assists, and he concluded someone has to stop this. Rachel Nichols, another major voice at ESPN, joined the criticism. She said it was insane that they were turning Lonzo into an artificial product with stats that didn't reflect what he actually did on the court. Now hold on a second, who was the Lakers' star player at that time? Who played on that exact same court with that same scorers table, with those same padded stat sheets? Exactly LeBron James. And yet, complete silence, no comment from Windhorst, no editorial from Nichols, no ESPN feature questioning whether those inflated assists were also boosting the Kings' numbers. Is it really possible that Lonzo, a rookie, had the power to manipulate the box score, but LeBron didn't? Or is it just that no one dares to say out loud that the system that padded Lonzo's stats also benefits LeBron every single night? Because if a questionable assist from a young kid is a scandal, but the exact same pass from a superstar is called a sign of elite court vision, then we're not talking about basketball anymore. We're talking about marketing. And that's the paradox. Criticizing Lonzo was easy. He didn't have a bulletproof narrative, no rings, no Nike empire, no documentaries in the works. But LeBron is untouchable. And that's where statistical honesty dies at the hands of the business. In today's NBA, the truth isn't just played out on the court anymore. It's edited, packaged, made to go viral. And when the main character is LeBron, all of that comes wrapped as if it were absolute truth. The narrative that he's the most complete player of all time didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built carefully, with curated headlines, with hand-picked stats served on a silver platter. There's always a perfect graphic, a favorable comparison, one more assist to add. And many of the people who should be questioning it, journalists, insiders, commentators, don't. Because they're too close. Because they're part of the same ecosystem that sells him. Questioning LeBron's numbers isn't just going against the player, it's going against the business. That's why, when a number doesn't add up, like the fact that Jordan could have more assists than him under the same criteria, it gets ignored, not discussed, not investigated, because the story has already been sold, and anyone who questions it gets left out. So if the narrative is untouchable, if the stats are shaped to support it, and if the media stays quiet when it's inconvenient, how do you know if what you're watching is real history or just a really good marketing campaign? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. This was Hoop Secrets, and I'll see you next time.